right, everybody. Finally,
That was a very long intro, Jacob.
Yeah, I know.
Really long.
I'm gonna have to work on shortening that. That was just a placeholder, though. And also, I'm the Politicrat online. Just letting you know I don't want to reveal myself yet. But either way, yeah, we are live right now. But 9 months after finally saying that I was going to start a philosophy in history and philosophy of history podcast or live stream or whatever, I'm finally doing it after saying I'll do it in 2 weeks. I say that every single time, but we are all here. How is everybody doing? This is the maiden episode of the Homo-sapien agenda. Is everyone doing all right this afternoon / evening?
I'm doing all right, and don't worry, I feel I'm 2 months into my 1 month stream break, so.
All right. Man, Argent.
I always like to say I'm living when people ask me that question, but yeah, I'm surviving. So as good as anyone can be these days.
Politicrat, can we introduce everyone so we know?
Yeah, that's exactly what to do. So we're gonna go ahead and do introductions. We're gonna start with Argent, go to John, and finally Strange Seconds. But yeah, Argent, take it away. Tell people.
Hey guys, so I'm Argent. I have a YouTube channel you can probably find pretty easily. I do a whole bunch of stuff. I do political videos, history videos. I guess kind of my niche is I do a lot of movie reviews or video game reviews or anime reviews, kind of from a right-wing perspective. So yeah, that's about it.
All right, and John David Ebert, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I'm a cultural critic, the author of about 30 books or so. I don't know, I've lost count on various aspects of culture, the arts, history, philosophy, religion, mythology, et cetera, and so that's my world, and I enjoy commenting on culture.
Nice, great to have you on here, John. We were supposed to do this last week, I know, but we had some technical difficulties, and then Settler's Lament had to back out too, which is why we have Argent on here now. But and finally, Strange Seconds, how are you doing? You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Yeah, so I'm Strange Seconds. I have a Twitch which I'm gonna start streaming on soonish. I'm just kind of a general all around nerd, I guess. Yeah, basically that. I'm an artist as well, designer, and I study advertising, so I'll probably be going into that soon.
All right. Thank you, everybody, once again for coming on, and thank you, everybody in the audience, for watching, sticking with us. I am going to be, because I normally with the political stream I do, normally we go very, very, very long, but for this stream series, I am purposefully going to regulate the timing and everything. So we're not going to go over an hour and a half tonight. And if any of you again need to leave early, that is completely fine. But again, this is the Homo-sapien agenda, where focus on history, philosophy, different topic each episode. And I felt like a good place to start, at least just for the inaugural episode, something not particularly complex, kind of like a crash course, so to speak. We talk about Western philosophers, our favorite Western philosophers. We're going to go start with classical world. We're going to kind of discuss the foundations there. We're not going to go into super detail with very specific ones. It's going to be conversational, discussion based. Talk about why we like certain philosophers, why we might not like other philosophers, and then we're going to talk about why they are so influential, and also so that's why I called this episode kind of tongue in cheek dead white males, because you have certain people these days who just seem to
I mean, it is technically what it is. It's
but
a bunch of dead white dudes.
Yeah, no, but that phrase is generally invoked by people who are just trying to kind of I guess underplay or understate kind of how influential they actually are. But so yeah, that's why we're focusing specifically on European philosophy. Hopefully get it through the Enlightenment. But again, it's not anything super complex. It's just going to be a casual conversation. And one of the main reasons I wanted to have John on here for this one, though, is because he knows, like, because his I think he got it from Toynbee or Quigley, the idea of the origins of philosophy in the, was it the second stage of civilization?
Yeah, during the second generation, Toynbee divides history into these three distinct generations. The first generation being the Egyptians and the Sumero-Babylonians, which are strictly religious. They never invented philosophy. Then we get the second generation because there's a distinct Chazora that occurs between 2000 BC and 1000, where we get all these Indo-Aryan invasions, Indo-Aryan, Indo-European invasions, Indo-Europeans in the West, Indo-Aryans in India. They come in riding horses. They're very aggressive individuals. They don't have writing. They have these oral traditions, portable fire altars. They bring in a cremation of the dead. All these things happen, and it happens across the board in the Middle East, all the way in China. They're not Indo-Aryans, but they're the same guys. They come in out of the steppe riding two-wheeled chariots, and they're very aggressive. So it's the same thing basically anywhere in China. And then this results after the dust settles in the second generation of civilization, which gets up and running with all these philosophical societies. At first, they're not. At first, they go through a religious phase as though to recapitulate the first generation. Each one of them does. And then midway through, each one of them, China with the 100 schools, and Lao Tzu, Motu, Chuang-Tzu, Confucius, gets up and running. And then in India with the Upanishads and the great schools, Sankhya, Buddhism, and so forth. And then in the West, the Hebrews basically remain religious, but with a philosophical orientation that's focused on ethics. And then with the Greeks, we get the event, the explosion, Athens. And so that's the second generation. And then the third generation then for Toynbee comes in with the creation now of the world's great universal churches that come in with all the different species of Christianity, Russian Christianity, Western Christianity, the Nestorians, the Monophysites, they're everywhere. And then with Islam at the same time as Russia, and also Japan is coming to being about the same time as Islam, and Mahayana Buddhism. So that represents the third generation, and those religions are all still with us. So they've been enormously effective and have had incredibly strong immune systems. You're not going to get rid of any of these religions. They're gigantic. They're singularities. And that's Toynbee's model of the three generations.
Okay, so thank you, John, for going out and explaining that. So we're going to be discussing starting around the axial age or the beginning of the second generation of civilizations with the birth of philosophy. So that would be in particularly Greece and India. However, we're going to be focusing on Greece right here, of course, because it's a European philosophy, the Western canon, more or less. So I'm going to start by putting up a little graphic here. Hold on, sorry. We're going to start by putting up a little graphic here. And so it's this quote is generally, well, it's a statement, not a question. It's a statement that is generally, according to Plato, attributed to Socrates. However, it is generally believed to be probably about 500 years older than that, possibly even predating that itself. But I think it is. It's also a very misunderstood statement right here. Know thyself. It is more or less the concept of knowledge. What we need to remember is the way they use it in this sense doesn't mean like, oh, like this sort of intellectual knowledge, like I know that this person did this thing on this date and I know that 2 + 2 = 4. It has to do with a more metaphysical, internal sort of I'm trying to put it in the best way. But yeah, does anybody have anything that they want to add just sort of on the beginnings of sort of Hellenic Greco-Roman philosophy. I think that the first one was God, who was the first one again?
Thales?
The pre-Socratics. Yeah.
Thales of something or
Thales,
other?
yes.
Thales.
Thales, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to say something because a book I read talked about know thyself. So I think part of what the interpretation of it that is kind of a bit lost on us is know thyself also means like know thy place within the cosmic order and things like that.
Basically similar to Dharma, and there's definitely, and I remember if anybody here has read Spengler, I know John has, but the parallels between Greco-Roman society, or specifically the Greeks and the Vedic society. I'm sorry for cutting off, Argent.
Right. So, the example they gave was from the Trojan War, where losing my train of thought here, but you just shouldn't overstep what you're supposed to do as a mortal. Gods have a certain position, humans have a certain position, and you should try to stay within those bounds. And when things get out of that, then that's when things get really bad. The book I recall also said the other one is all things in moderation. And that was kind of the essence of Greek philosophy, was know thyself and all things in moderation.
Golden mean, yeah, precisely. And on that note, I think what I want to do now is I just want to just go down one by one, referring specifically to ancient Greek philosophers. Your favorite and your least favorite, and explain why. Give a reason why. I will go last, but let's start with John and go up from there. You had to choose least favorite, favorite, and why.
So the question is, once again, now what? Now choose.
Oh no, okay. Out of any of the classical philosophers, which one is your favorite? Which one is your least favorite?
Oh, Plato, hands down. I mean, that's easy. Plato was incredible. He was a genius, and he's still, in a way, Plato is like the summa, the climax of the whole development that goes, from Thales and then Anaximander, Anaximenes, and all of those Ionian thinkers. And then the climax in his thinking with an encyclopedic erudition for that time. It's just a total event in the history of the West where we got this fireworks display of Plato saying something about everything that was known in that time, with the idea of the forms, the idea of the eidolons, that everything in the world is patterned after these metaphysical archetypes that somehow exist in a transcendent world. He's a little vague about that. Where are these archetypes? But for him, they're transcendent. And that's a key event in the West, because it leads to all kinds of, later to Neoplatonism with Plotinus, and then on down into the West with Goethe, for instance, is inherited, and Carl Jung with the archetypes. So it's an extremely effectual system of ideas. Heidegger tries to portray it as a decline. He's wrong about this. He tries to portray, because Heidegger loved the pre-Socratics, with their idea of being as physis. It's immanental for the pre-Socratics that being is in the world, things arise, flash forth, and dissolve. They're these evanescent phantoms, whereas he doesn't like Plato, because Plato, for him, the ideas are transcendent. They're above the world. They're not in the world. But Aristotle makes up for it with his systematic thinking by embedding the ideas into physical matter as entelechies. So everything that's alive has this idea inside of it that is actualizing itself through possibilities. So that's another enormously influential set of ideas. These two guys are great for a reason. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
All right. Oh, you didn't say your least favorite.
Oh, my least favorite of the, ironically, probably Socrates. Even though he was
not for the same reason as Nietzsche, I'm guessing.
No, for exactly the same reason.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think Nietzsche was one of the very few people who nailed this idea that Socrates was shallow. Socrates did not have the profundity that his pupil Plato did. He was just a walking intellect, a walking ratiocinative intellect, questioning everyone about their tradition.
He was a troll, basically.
A what?
A troll.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. And he looked like a troll, apparently. He was very ugly. And So yeah, it's just, whereas with Plato, yeah, Socrates becomes his protagonist, but it really isn't Socrates. It's Plato's version of him under the influence of Pythagoras, which is Plato's hidden teacher that nobody talks about. But I think Pythagoras has, with his mysticism, has a much greater influence on Plato ultimately than Socrates does. And so if you read the first Platonic dialogue, which is the Apology, that's the one that's still closest to the pseudomorphosis of Socrates. And then as you read them, if you read them in chronological order, you can see him shedding the nihilism of Socrates to come into these amazing cosmologies with reincarnation. Plato has reincarnation. He's got this incredible cosmology that he evolves in the Phaedo. It just gets more and more and more complex, and I think he leaves Socrates behind. So I don't care much for Socrates.
Thanks, John. Okay, Strange Seconds, you're up. Who is it out of all the ancient Greek philosophers? Who's your favorite? Who's your least favorite? And why is that?
I mean, I'm not really sure. I have a least favorite. When it comes to philosophy, I tend to prefer later philosophy and later philosophers. I could probably give you far more of an opinion if we were talking like after the Renaissance.
Okay, yeah.
But before, there is one I've been reading some basically about some of it. It's the founder of Pyrrhonism, I believe it's pronounced. These words are fucking hard, I guess. But like Pyrrhonism. His name was Pyrrho. I'm not sure how that'd be pronounced exactly.
Pyrrho.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But essentially, though, Pyrrhonism was kind of like, from what I've been reading, some of the early foundations of what led to skepticism, and you can make connections with that and things like absurdism, which if you can't tell, I'm a big Camus fan, so it's I've been reading about that, so I guess right now he's my current favorite.
Okay.
But then again, there's only like fragments of his philosophy that's around. It's not like a full. They don't have everything.
Oh yeah, no, there are a lot of those back, especially around the classical, like the high classical period in Greece, and then like I remember I was doing a giant like internet rabbit hole going on like JS Store. I forget how to pronounce, but like getting like reading all these articles about these philosophers that we've just heard. We've heard their names, we've heard them mentioned. We know the names of things that they wrote, but we do not have any of their manuscripts. And it almost makes you wonder, okay, like I wonder like how many, like what was the breadth of philosophy in the days of the pre-Socratics other than just the pre-Socratics? It's like there could be so much more that we just don't know. And then the really interesting guys we get to, I think no one really talks about them, but the pseudo-Zoroastrians. So you have like the pseudo-Zarathustra and then the other two guys.
The early dualist stuff.
Yeah, no, but what was interesting is so they took these Persian religious ideas, but in reality what they did is they just took them and they reinterpreted them and they just made them they just reinterpreted them and presented them in a way that was fundamentally Greek. So again, kind of like a pseudomorphosis.
Are you talking about Manichaeism or
no, way before Manichaeism. The oh god, hold on, I'm figuring it.
I was going to say, though, about Pyrrhonism. Basically, the long and short of it, I was able to find a decent summary online that words it better than I could. But essentially, most sources agree the primary goal of Pyrrhonism was the achievement of a state of ataraxia. That's it, or freedom from mental perturbation or troubles or whatever, and essentially he believed that could only be brought about by eschewing beliefs or dogma, is what he said, about thoughts and perceptions, and I kind of like that.
Okay. I think that sort of we get into the actually no, we're not going to go there yet. Argent, skip right over you. Do you want to go ahead and talk about or just mention favorite, least favorite classical philosophers and why that is the case?
This is difficult. I'm not going to say Plato just because everyone says Plato. I guess probably if we're talking just Mediterranean, I'd say Plotinus.
I mean, that's a little later, but I'll let it slide.
That's late antiquity.
Yeah.
I'd say probably Plotinus, just because I really like Neoplatonism. I think it really provided, because I think when it comes to like Christianity, you had the revealed parts of the religion, but you really needed a metaphysical underpinning to kind of give it backbone.
It's exactly what indeed hath Athens to do with Jerusalem? Like Christianity is the result of that synthesis between Greco-Roman metaphysics and the teachings of Christ. So.
And like I was really into Neoplatonism. That's one of the reasons I wound up becoming a Christian, is I just kind of saw that as the fulfillment of that. So I'd say Plotinus. I don't know if there's a specific. It gets very difficult when you're talking about early Indian philosophy, because I don't know if there's known writers for most of it.
They don't really have a written history.
Like when you're looking at like the Vedas and stuff like that. So I studied that at university, and I found that all quite interesting. I'd also list Zoroaster, if we can count him as a philosopher.
Oh yeah, no, he's a Persian, so he's a dead white man.
I was really into Zoroastrianism back in the day. I just find it a very interesting religion, for a number of reasons, because it is like an Indo-European religion, but it has a lot of similarities with Abrahamic religions as well. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of this.
The eschatology really influenced Judaism.
I mean, yeah, you could arguably say that. All three of the major Abrahamic religions are in a way, at least extremely influenced by Indo-European, at least practice.
And Babylonian mythology. You can't remember that. Like the Enuma Elish in the Book of Genesis have a lot of similarities, especially like the numerology too. Like 7, especially. It took 7 days to dedicate a temple. That's why
the book. Genesis is basically the Epic of Gilgamesh, but with people with their names changed and a few events swapped around, essentially.
Not really. I mean, the Book of Genesis is.
Disagree on that one.
I disagree on that one too. Like,
I don't know. It's been a while since I've read the Book of Genesis, though. Also, I'm curious. You said you became a Christian. What did you convert from?
Basically just monotheism without any specific.
So like a deist kind of.
Yeah, or just I probably just called myself a Neoplatonist or something at the time.
Oh, were you raised religious though?
Okay, hey guys, let's get back on topic.
Yeah,
have these conversations afterwards.
You're right.
Again,
okay,
I'm gonna be
dead white males is the topic.
Yes.
So just I'd say probably Plotinus and Zoroaster, and then some of the Indian philosophers. As far as least favorite goes, I don't know if there's anyone I really hate during the period. My issue is just some of the people who, like, I don't hate Marcus Aurelius, but I find a lot of his modern devotees are kind of cringy.
I can agree with that.
And then some of Aristotle's modern devotees can be kind of cringy.
Like Ayn Rand.
Yeah, just like when it comes to Marcus Aurelius, I find a lot of atheists will use him as like their poster boy, kind of like how they'll use Julian the Apostate. So I don't know if I necessarily like hate anyone from this time period, but some people's descendants are more cringy than others.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm just saying, though, the cringe of those atheists, they're like, yes, let me use the words of someone who believed in, like, a bunch of different gods in a far more disorganized way as proof there is no God.
But, yeah, so as for me, I'm going to have to say, and I know this is kind of it's pretty normie, I'm going to have to say Aristotle. Because he just did so much. I can't think of maybe a single other philosopher in history, even in modern times, who was as much of a polymath as Aristotle was. Aristotle, ethics, politics, economics, in a sense. I mean, of course, it was different than now, but economics, mathematics, physics, history. The closest thing, maybe Goethe is maybe the only modern figure we can close to that.
I'd say Confucius.
What about like Descartes? Maybe is.
No, I don't think
Confucius is Eastern, but I would say Confucius falls under that same kind of umbrella.
Maybe, but he was more of a legal kind of practically.
Oh, Newton. That's who I was thinking of.
Yeah. So, Newton maybe, but either way. So, Aristotle, I remember the first time I read Aristotle, it was a philosophy class, my sophomore year of high school, and we had to read Nicomachean Ethics, and it just made a lot of sense to me. The idea of moderation, the mean between two extremes, don't do anything in excess. It seemed like it made practical sense, like practical wisdom, and I liked his take on like his idea of friendship. Like there are different forms of friendship, like friendship based on utility, friendship based on pleasure, and friendship on the basis of virtue. And it just that reading that specifically kind of made me reevaluate a lot of my sort of social connections and relationships. So I guess that was important. But then his politics is fantastic too. Like the idea of how he divides, and I know Plato sort of did this too, but about how Aristotle divides and talks about there's democracy, there is tyranny, and then there's oligarchy, which are the bastardized forms of polity and aristocracy and monarchy. And yeah, but one of the funniest quote, like it hasn't really aged well, but I still think it conveys a greater truth when you really know what he says. But masculine republics turn into feminine democracies.
I would mention this, that regarding Aristotle's golden mean, everything in moderation, I actually prefer Blake's line where he says, the road to wisdom lies along the path of excess. And for me, that resonates. I can't do anything in moderation, nothing. Alcohol, sex, whatever it is, I crank up the knob and go all the way, because in doing that, it does teach you lessons. It does teach you lessons on this planet about what happens when you do that. Then you have to pay prices, and then you have to deal with that. So you learn very valuable lessons, and I think Aristotle misses this.
I mean, Nietzsche does, in a sense, talk about that too. It's it doesn't kill you, makes you. So yeah, I know not to. I remember there was, I'm not even going to go into it. It was dumb college stuff, but yeah, exactly. But yeah, Aristotle's
idea is, it's almost like a British gentlemanly idea, which is like, it just repels me. It's like, dude, you're not living life. We're down here to have fun.
I mean, he definitely has some, like, seems like an ancient Edmund Burke in some instances. Yeah. I can see that.
Okay, don't say that about Aristotle.
you don't like, wait, Argent, I think you'd, out of all of us here, you'd be the one to like Burke the most.
Oh, I hate Edmund Burke.
Really? Okay, we're gonna have to talk about that when we get to the Enlightenment.
Just a note on Aristotle, I think we can really give him credit for kind of inventing classifications, or coming up with the idea that it's important to classify things.
Yep.
Because didn't he invent like those taxonomy trees?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and just that, and then government, and then
Western science really comes from him. I mean, he really is the founder of it.
Oh yeah.
But he's a dead white male and apparently irrelevant. Really. It's funny, the entire university system, when it was invented in the 12th century in both France and England, was based on studying the curriculum of Aristotle. He provided them, because of his diversity with all these different subjects, with here is an educated mind, you need to know something about everything. And that brought the university into being. And from out of that, then the scientific method of taxonomy, classification, Linnaeus, with his classificatory models of biology. Absolutely. What's funny is that if you deleted Plato and Aristotle from existence, and we said that these two guys never happened, Western science then never happens. It never gets anywhere.
Wait, actually, hold on. Can I push? Let me push back on that real quick, John. You have especially this. I guess I'm gonna use this from a Spenglerian perspective, though. But the idea that with the morphology, somebody else is going to come along to fulfill that same role.
That's true.
I think it would be different.
Yeah, that's just a thought experiment. There's no way you can delete them, because you're right. If you did, somebody else would come in to fulfill that morphologically. That's correct, actually.
Yeah,
it's just a thought.
No, it was interesting because there was sort of a alternate history novel that was pretty interesting that I ended up getting. It was What If Aquinas. Basically the whole concept was it takes place modern day, but in a world where Aquinas declared that basically science and religion were incompatible, and basically Europe is this sort of backwater like terrorist. Like basically, the role with them in the Middle East is swapped. It was interesting though, but it is interesting sometimes to think about these points of divergence. What could have happened if like these little things, if something else happened, and that would actually be a great subject for another episode sometime. Just alternate history, but either way.
I'll definitely try and come on for that one. I could talk endlessly about alternate history.
Yeah.
If I could just make one final point about Plato and Aristotle, I kind of hate when people try to play them off like they're against each other. I think it's a bit like when people argue what's better, dogs or cats. They're just different. Like they're comparable.
Cats are better. Way. Cats are better.
You seem like what? I'm not surprised you're a cat person.
Yeah, I know.
I'm also a cat person. I'm cat sitting. I'm cat sitting a little like 8 to 10 month old kitten right now. It's adorable.
But I just think they're very different. They're for people with different lifestyles or different. Like some people like that dogs are always want attention. Some people prefer that cats don't. And my point is, I just think Plato and Aristotle are dealing with kind of different approaches in different subject areas, even if they overlap. So I think when people try to present them as being some sort of like opponents, I think it's a little contrived.
I mean, they weren't. I mean, basically, they were still in the same overarching philosophical school of thought, but Aristotle, his differences with Plato was more so his response. It was basically him responding to Plato and saying, no, actually, this is like what I think. It was all because sort of that classic sort of back and forth. I know there weren't any really. I don't think there were any dialogues between them that were ever written out, but I mean, you especially saw a lot of that, like sort of in the intellectual spheres, exchanging ideas, writing letters back and forth, arguing with each other. But yeah, I mean, they're very different. I mean, Aristotle was Plato's student, and you have to take that into consideration. Everybody is going to disagree with everybody on some things. I mean,
yeah,
exactly.
I mean, the way I view philosophy, it's kind of just what helps you kind of make sense of everything. And so if what works for some people works for, I don't know, that's just my view on it. Is what works for some people doesn't work for others, and philosophy isn't really against each other. It's more just different forms of expressing a very similar, I guess, yearning. I don't know, like the idea of wanting to understand, I suppose.
Right. I want to say here that you said that it's too bad we don't have a dialogue between them, but I think Raphael has, in your School of Athens here, has provided us with a dialogue, because with the hand gestures, he's painted Plato pointing directly upward with Plato's transcendent orientation to the forms and ultimately the good. And then here, Aristotle next to him is gesturing horizontally. His interest is in the physical world, the physical plane. He founds physics and biology, and the interest in the sciences focusing on the physical plane. So it's interesting. There is an opposition between them. And yeah, it is kind of cat or dog person. Do you prefer more the transcendent mystical, or do you prefer more the scientific, concrete, physical? So in a sense, two of them embody a yin-yang wholeness. You know, it's like you can't really have one without the other because they're complementing each other. And it is interesting that another point that you mentioned is that with regard to philosophers disagreeing with each other, it's really interesting because you have Kant and then you have Hegel disagreeing with Kant, or Kant and then Schopenhauer.
They still have that same like view of progress.
Yeah. And exactly. So they complement each other because no one can. The human brain isn't designed to capture everything and get it right. That's why we sort of rely on each other to look at things from different angles so that we can get a larger perspective from all the different points of views and angles. Everyone has something to contribute. I have never read one thinker, even if I didn't like the guy, that didn't have something to contribute, that didn't get something right. That's just the way the brain works. Everyone's analyzing reality from a different angle. And that's why it's important to understand the history of philosophy, because then it gives us a much larger view of the truth, which is somehow contained in all these opposite points of view. So I just throw that in.
If I've learned one thing from my psychology classes that I've had to take, it is that memory is an extremely unreliable source. And one person's perspective is worth about jack shit on its own.
Right.
So yeah, I guess that is interesting though, John, what you're talking about, the difference between Plato, Aristotle, the physical versus the transcendent. So in a sense, then that means it's almost like the Aristotle would be, I guess, the equivalent of, and again, because like sort of like the civilizational parallels when you look at it like that, because I actually do 100% believe that is the most clear way of even studying ideas in philosophies, when you sort of line up the evolution of cultures together, basically in order to basically get a sense of what's going on in that period. But so in a sense, Aristotle, maybe if you're to find a parallel, would be sort of a mishmash of a lot of the 19th century British philosophers and thinkers, in a sense, like the Darwins, the Mills, I'm trying to think. No, not a. I'm trying to think. I have no idea why I can't think of any more off the top of my head. Or a bit like sort of like post Enlightenment, mixed with Goethe. I don't know. I think you can't really. Again, I don't think it's probably not a great idea to make these direct parallels. But
with the exception that Aristotle, nonetheless, is still metaphysical. He's got the entelechy idea. He's got the idea of the prime mover. That basically becomes God, especially important for the ontological argument for the existence of God. This idea of a first cause that set everything in motion. He does have respect for the metaphysical. He just wants to make sure that it's concrete, that our boots are on the ground here. And also notice that, too, in this painting that Raphael has painted Plato in the image of Leonardo da Vinci. He looks just like him. If you look at images of Leonardo, that's what he's done here, is to sort of combine Leonardo with Plato, which is interesting because Plato is way more transcendent than Leonardo, and Leonardo is very concrete. Still metaphysical, though, like Aristotle. He still thinks of nature as a metaphysical operation of mysterious forces, but he's constantly obsessed with nature in a way that I'm not sure we could say that Plato was. So it's an interesting... Raphael's painting here is very subtle, and that by painting those two together, it makes you think a lot. There's a lot going on in this painting. It's not just a simple, admiration for these two great dead white men. Raphael has carefully thought this out.
So that is interesting that you also bring that up, because Plato was almost entirely focused on the transcendent. That's why he was probably so appealing to the Gnostics and later on the Sufis, and then in the Christian world like Meister Eckhart. Those because of his. And I actually had a conversation with an Uber driver last night who happened to be a Sufi, and we talked for like an hour in my driveway. but he was talking about knowledge and basically knowing thyself. He didn't say know thyself, but basically about how you get out of your head. That's not where you find knowledge, like not where you find knowledge. But yeah, either way, it was just, that's an interesting throwaway fact of something happened. But yeah, no, Plato's influence, he's definitely influenced the more esoteric traditions.
I think the irony, there's another irony too in this painting, which is that if you panned out and got the full painting in there, he's got Michelangelo in there sitting down below on the steps thinking about his next problem. And Michelangelo, in contrast to Leonardo da Vinci, who's much more concrete, Michelangelo was heavily influenced by Neoplatonism, which is in the book Studies in Iconology, where the guy, I've forgotten his name, talks about how Michelangelo's works, his sculptures, every single one of them had Neoplatonic ideas in them. So he does have a much more otherworldly emphasis on his work than Leonardo does, who has a lot of hermetic and geometrical symbolism, but isn't particularly that much interested in Hermeticism per se, or Neoplatonism, the way Michelangelo is. And you would think that it would be the opposite, but it really isn't. And so Raphael is trying to get you to think of the opposition between Plato and Aristotle on the one hand, and Leonardo and Michelangelo on the other. So this is an amazing dialogue here with the Western tradition that's just captured in one snapshot image. That is a work of total brilliance, and it's not overrated. You know, we get these.
Oh, it's actually okay. It's missing one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's missing. It's missing Diogenes naked in the background.
Yes, he's there too. Yeah, a whole bunch of thinkers are in this painting.
But also because you know Diogenes, he would basically just like he would engage in public masturbation.
Yeah, he didn't give a shit about anyone.
Yeah,
he lived in this a shell of some sort, or
basically a box or something. I don't know.
He was like a homeless guy, except he was a philosopher too.
Yeah,
you know, a homeless guy with an intellect. Yeah, he didn't care about society or social conventions, so there is that attitude too. And it's interesting because it's almost as though the Greeks. There is no attitude that prevails today that the Greeks didn't somehow anticipate. That's why they're the Greeks. That's why we worship them, because they were a total singularity. You know, they're great no matter which way you look at them.
So moving on from the Greek. Oh, I actually wanted to mention. I forgot to mention my least favorite. I don't know if I can really pinprick a least favorite. I don't like a lot of the. I'm not thinking of the. I don't like the hedonists that came later on. They were basically the equivalent of, I'd say, the Marxists in like our culture, just hyper materialists.
Like Epicurus, like that.
I mean, Epicurus I can respect, okay. But I mean, I'm talking about the ones that came a little after him. I'm thinking of one. I can't. His name escapes me right now, but it's not that important. But I wanted to bring up one time. None of us mentioned Heraclitus, and I feel like his importance, especially his idea of being, which is pretty much ground zero for much of German philosophy that would develop later on too.
Absolutely. Spengler wrote his dissertation on Heraclitus.
Yeah,
and Heidegger, he's Heidegger's favorites as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then I forget were Kant and Hegel and Hume also influenced by Heraclitus? For some reason, I want to say at least Kant was. Either way,
I'm not sure.
Let's move on then from sort of classical stuff because we need to move ahead. Briefly talk about late antiquity, maybe. Late antiquity, I feel like at that point, Spengler's pretty good at when he talks about this. Basically, philosophically sterile. Everything was pretty much just a rehash of an older idea. And this is in contrast to what Argent was saying. Argent, you're still with us, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just didn't know if you walked away for this. But you said you're not a huge fan of Aurelius, or at least Aurelius's modern devotees. I would say Stoicism I have mixed feelings on because it kind of does go against the a lot of the whole moderation, like the moderation aspects that I admire in Aristotle. However, at the same time, the sort of introspective, meditative aspect of it, I like. But I like how Aurelius did it, or how Aurelius's writings the most, because he just kind of comes across as a. I guess maybe I just like him more as a person, because he seems very down to earth when he's actually writing in his wise meditations. But I've also always liked that he has this. He's kind of the embodiment of Plato's philosopher king, if there had to be one in that period. Just that whole sort of, and then his son was a complete opposite. but yeah, Aurelius and Julian the Apostate were like the two great philosopher emperors of the like the final stage of the Hellenic world. But so yeah, I like him, but I do disagree though with Spengler's characterization of the Stoics as the socialists. I really don't see that correlation personally. But either way, so late antiquity. Let's just do this fairly quickly, starting with John. If you can think of any, if there are any in particular, which ones do you admire? Which ones aren't you such a fan of?
Oh, once again, here it's very easy. Plotinus is my favorite of the late antique thinkers. If we want to call it late antique, although Spengler situates Plotinus within the Magian civilization as one of its early thinkers. So, and maybe it is something new. But the thing about Plotinus...
Oh, he's a dead white man, so it doesn't matter. That's all that matters, yeah.
Well, there's always that, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But Plotinus I think of as more of an Egyptian philosopher than a Greek philosopher, which is interesting because that's an oxymoron. The Egyptians never had philosophy. But once the Ptolemies went in there, once Alexander went in there and the Ptolemies took over Egypt, they infected it with all these Greek philosophical ideas. So with Plotinus, we get a fusion of Greek thinking with local native Egyptian thinking, because what Plotinus does is he mummifies the universe. So if you think about his cosmology, he has the one at the top as let's say the outermost sheath or wrapping, and then that the one is the ultimate. And Plotinus knew about Indian philosophy, so he wanted to go to India and tried. He joined a Roman contingent to go there, and it failed, so he had to go back to Egypt. So it didn't work. But he knew from his teacher Ammonius Saccas that he knew that the Hindus had this ultimate idea of Brahman, the ultimate unity. So that's his one. And then below that is the nous, which is the cosmic mind. This is the mind. The nous is static, completely static. It doesn't move, and it's incorruptible. So this is the mind from whence Plato's forms would come. These are the ideas, let's say, of God that are emanating downward toward the earth. But in between the nous and the earth is the anima mundi, which is associated with the planets, the movements of the planets, which is now dynamic but incorruptible. Still incorruptible, but now in motion. So we're getting down, we're mummifying the earth. And the earth becomes the sort of body that has been mummified here. It is the worst place in the universe for Plotinus, but it is the place where...
the dualism, right?
Yeah, the dualism. But these energies radiate downward through these wrappings of the mummy down to the earth. And it is like Gnosticism in a way, because he hated the Gnostics and he hated astrology. He has critical essays on both of them. But that's probably competition. That's probably his competitive ego. But nonetheless, he has a similar idea that you can attain knowledge, gnosis, through remembering these layers, these cosmic origins that we have come from down here. And his whole philosophy, like Plato's too, is a philosophy of beauty. If you read Plotinus, his prose is exquisitely beautiful. Everything, he's inherited this Greek idea that everything is beautiful. That's the Greek aesthetic. That's their whole worldview. Things are beautiful. And Plotinus has inherited this. And so he's really at the crossroads of Western philosophy here, where he inherits both these traditions, synthesizes them beautifully into probably, the Enneads is probably my favorite book from late antiquity. Yeah. So.
Okay. Strange Seconds, you back? You finished with the cats?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So late antiquity. Philosophers that stand out to you, philosophers that you think are duds. Any you have in particular?
It's been a while since I've studied late antiquity. I would sorry, I'd need to.
That's fine. You don't have to
Yeah,
listen.
yeah.
There's not really much. But by that point, there's really the Hellenic Greco-Roman machine is pretty much kind of stopped turning. So anyway, Argent. Other than Plotinus, because I know you.
I wish I'd read the Church Fathers more, so I can't really go in about them. If Classical Theist was here, he could probably go on about them for hours. I guess I find Julian the Apostate to be really cringe. As I can't say the exact description, but a friend of mine likes to call him the first Christian emperor, in that he looked at the world from that kind of perspective, and he tried to make paganism emulate it. My issue is just him and Marcus Aurelius are used in atheist historiography as, they're like, that's what all the Roman emperors were like, and then Christianity happened, and then the Roman Empire collapsed.
Oh yeah, one of the cringiest things I've seen, and this, I'm not even saying this from like any sort of position of bias or anything. It's just because if you actually look at it, this is definitely not what happened. Like you see, like for instance, there was a book I saw at like a Barnes and Noble the other day, and it was something about how Christianity, or I forget what it was worded, but it's like how Christianity destroyed the I don't think the word was destroyed, but it was like, or how it's it was like how it somethinged the it was called like the darkening of the world, or something like the name of the book. It was something like that, and it was like how Christianity like destroyed the Greco-Roman culture. It's like, no, Greco-Roman culture was basically already dead at that point. Christianity just came in to breathe new life into society because it needed a new metaphysical framework. It's like too few people, like not enough I think you could also blame this on like Enlightenment thinkers like Gibbon for kind of also perpetuating that the whole fiction of there being a dark age. But yeah.
Like just on that subject, I'm reading a biography of Charlemagne at the moment, and the first like 10th of the book is the author just talking about how hard it is for him to find sources on anything. Like he couldn't find any definition of what the empire was like, what the population was like. The Franks didn't really keep any kind of ethnographics. So this is kind of one of the issues with late antiquity. Who knows? There might be a bunch of other stuff out there. It's just a lot of records got destroyed when Rome collapsed, and then the Dark Ages from my understanding, are called that just because there's not a lot of material. The literary urban culture had kind of collapsed, and you didn't have stuff like Caesar's Gallic Wars.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I've read about the period, they did have a lot of that writing. There were a lot of problems. It was extremely biased because almost all of the writing back then was only religious orders. And
how is that? But that's kind of like how it's always been, sort of at the beginning, when a culture is like sort of growing, because all cultures start with a religion
at the beginning, but that still leads to its own inherent set of biases that are like, I'm looking at this.
Well, how is that biased? Because so many of them disagree with each other.
From a historical way. Well, like when I was saying for historical, for instance, everything we know about Viking mythology comes from essentially scattered Catholic monks who briefly spoke about it. And the problem is we don't know if the version they did was the Christian syncretized version, which is why there's suspiciously an ending to Ragnarok, which suddenly leads to there just being a man and a woman left alive. And then what? It's like Adam and Eve suddenly showed up there. Huh? It's like,
wait, John, I'm sorry. John, weren't we talking about this the other day, I think?
It's like, what is actual history? And what is, oh, hey, we don't really know what that part's supposed to be, so I'm just going to fill in the blank with what I think is the case, which that could be the case because that's their rigid system of beliefs, or maybe they came from a certain area, which that was their culture, or yada, yada, yada. You get what I'm saying?
Well, actually, so I'm inclined to, in a sense, take the reverse perspective in a sense. Like, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of the mythology that we have, especially in the Nordic world. A lot of the stuff we have is Christianized. I mean, not all of it, but I mean, Beowulf is the best example. Well, Beowulf, you could argue, is more Anglo-Saxon, but regardless,
one of my favorite works of literature of all time. Just to put in a plug.
Put your plug in it, of course.
Joel Davis and I on Sunday will be discussing Beowulf on Sunday. So I don't know if he's live streaming that or what, but so that's coming up. Beowulf, one of my all-time favorite works of literature. And let me say this about it, is that it's not like it's portrayed by Neil Gaiman and Robert Zemeckis in their Beowulf film, which is just Beowulf for the masses. Beowulf is a dragon slayer. Beowulf is a killer of giants. That's not what Beowulf is about. Beowulf was written by we don't know the guy's name, but he was extremely sophisticated, and he knew he was a Christian, and so he's got the Christian tradition, but he knew the Scandinavian traditions like the back of his hand. He knew all of it. And Beowulf is a thinly disguised Anglo version of Thor. Thor was the giant killer. That was his job in Scandinavian myth. He's the immune system of Valhalla. His job is to keep the giants.
Oh my God, I haven't thought about it that way, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so his job is so there's the world wall that surrounds Midgard, and his job is to keep the giants from coming over that wall. So he functions as an immune system, and so Beowulf is basically doing the same thing regarding Heorot. Just it's localized and provincialized. It's not cosmic anymore. So this author provincializes it to this one hall, this beer hall thing, Heorot. And everyone's singing, and the singing really hurts Grendel's ears. He's a giant, so the implication is that he has escaped over the world wall and come in here. So we need a Thor character to get rid of him, and the locals in England can't do it, so they have to call on a Scandinavian guy because that's where these myths come from. So they have to import Thor in the guise of Beowulf, who's not a historical character, although everyone that he's surrounded by, Hrothgar and so forth, they're all historically verifiable. But not him, so he comes in and he has to get rid of Grendel, chases him back down to his cave, and
kills his mom later.
Then, yeah, exactly. He kills his mom, but the second half of the epic is where the brilliance comes in, because the author talks about him going out to kill this dragon many years later, because he's still living on fumes at this point. He's living off of his earlier fame, and he wants to establish that he is still that, even though he's old now, he's still that great dragon slayer. So it's the Viking myth of the individual hero, and he goes out and does this and puts in peril his entire tribe, the Yeots. It looks like it should read Geats, but it's not. It's apparently Yeots. And he puts them in peril, and he fights this dragon, and he loses. And in losing, the Yeots their days are numbered. They disappear. So he makes one bad decision after the next in the second half of the epic. So this Anglo-Saxon writer shows you the greatness of the Viking idea in the first half, and in the second half shows you where this kind of ego can lead. This kind of egoism can lead to the extermination of an entire people, because one guy has such an ego inflation that he wants to go out and do these deeds, which puts the whole society in jeopardy. So it's a complete criticism, actually, ironically, of the Viking mentality. So it's not a simple epic.
Which was an abortive civilization, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
according to Twinbee. Yeah.
Yeah, well, not to mention also that also really well, I think, reflects the actual story of Ragnarok, because it's either the ending of Thor or Odin. I'm not entirely certain right now, but one of them goes down in combat with the final beast they were always pursuing, which was Fenrir.
Yeah.
And so in a way it's mirrored with the dragon. But what I was going to also say earlier as a response, Politicrat, is it's not only that I'm not saying religious bias was the whole reason nothing survived the Dark Age. It was one of the many, many reasons. There's also the fact that,
Well, is it actually? Can you actually call it religious bias when all of society is actually religious?
Thing is, though, it really depends. Are you saying that an English Catholic would be the exact same as a Hungarian Catholic, the exact same as a Roman Catholic, the exact same as... It's mostly... If you want to boil it down to its simplest form, I'm basically saying cultural bias.
Because each different, even different countries within a culture, each interpret sort of the general the cultural, the world picture very differently, and that's the cause of many wars. Basically, if you think about it, World War II was basically the civil war, a civil war between the three great modernist political ideologies: liberalism, socialism, and fascism, all of which in some way or another are born from the Enlightenment. Yeah.
I'd say the other two big reasons, though, are that with the Dark Ages as well, they didn't write down multiple copies of things. Typically things, one dude wrote it, he put it in his monastery, and it was done. And the other thing is, people like Vikings weren't just in the north with England. There were raiders everywhere, and a lot of manuscripts got burned during the process of the Dark Ages.
Yep.
They wrote plenty of stuff down. It's just most of the knowledge was destroyed, and nobody bothered to save it immediately afterwards, so it was gone forever.
Yeah, and it almost makes me wonder if it was like that too, because if you think that the European Dark Ages were bad, you should go back about 1500 years earlier. Now the Greek Dark Ages, they were so bad we don't even have any writing from them. So it's like the Sea Peoples did the same exact thing. Basically, the Sea Peoples were basically their Vikings in a sense.
It's not even just the Greek Dark Ages is a very small part of it. That was basically a near global civilizational collapse with the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age collapse? Yeah. Nobody knows what caused it. Some people think it was sea people, and I kind of like that.
Well, that was probably just it was probably a domino effect. It was probably they probably did what they did as a. However, I have been playing around with an idea that some of the sea people, it was like a Mycenaean attempt to sort of build a universal state, maybe.
That's where all the myths of Atlantis come from.
Possibly, but you have flood myths that predate. I'm sure when
a lot of the flood myths come from Mesopotamia, because that river was very unpredictable in how it flowed.
Oh yeah, no, totally. But yeah, no, and I'm making a video on this for my YouTube channel. My theory on Ziggurats, why basically at least for this I'm taking a more empirical approach, I guess, on this, but the purpose of Ziggurats being there was a lot of flooding in Mesopotamia. Whenever there's flooding in other regions, more towards Persia, they could just go up into the mountains. The alluvial plains of Mesopotamia had no mountains to escape the flooding from. So what do you want to do? You're going to want to create artificial mountains. And eventually those are going to develop spiritual significance. And it's going to be okay, we need to protect our God. We need to protect our deities and put them up here too. Then they became the houses of the deities. They got bigger and bigger and bigger. And probably the origins of Genesis 11 too. Because even Josephus in his History of Antiquity of the Jews talks about, he said, the reason that they built their ziggurats in Shinar, which was what they called Sumer, was in case God would send another flood, so they wouldn't be drowned. That was his
Genesis 11.
My favorite. It's so underrated. I love that one.
Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel. What that actually is a Rube's version of the building of a ziggurat. This is a guy from Nebraska who goes to New York, and he looks at the skyscrapers and he goes, "Oh, they're storming the heavens with these things. They're irreligious. They're so," and so that's basically what it is. The Hebrews at this point are not particularly culturally sophisticated, and when they see the Tower of Babel is a parody of
when they go into when they're exiled in Babylon, and they see, because a lot of they were purposefully alluding to, they were purposefully like poking fun at a lot of these things, but at the same time, I do think that the Tower of Babel with the construction, I mean, you can take it from a perspective, interpret that from a perspective to see it as at that point, the building of the ziggurat really started to become divorced from the spiritual, and it became more about them wanting to make a name for themselves, like Gilgamesh. You see that transition of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
Because at that point, Gilgamesh is like that's the Epic of Gilgamesh is basically the story of how ancient Sumer basically just of course they never actually abandoned their religion. But basically, when they kind of unshackle themselves from the chains of slavery to their gods to live like...
Yeah, the ziggurats do get bigger and bigger over time.
It basically become vanity projects. Like
they do.
That's what I think it was. Like ziggurats, basically, like you used to see like these nice Gothic cathedrals in the Middle Ages, but then you start to get more towards then you start to see all the, like, back towards like the 1900s, they start building these giant mega churches and all of this stuff. And
in New York, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, the biggest cathedral ever built, because it has to compete with the skyscrapers now. So it's a matter more of ego than it is of spirituality. Yeah, it's the same.
I think that's happened in like almost every civilization, really.
Yeah. And you see that, so the biggest ziggurat, and so
even Stalin was like, "I've got to have bigger statue than Lenin."
Yeah,
they're just compensating for their small dicks, basically.
I'm going to take a slightly different perspective. I kind of think that if there was a spiritual aspect to the ziggurat, it's a post hoc justification. I think they just built them because it's a very simple building design. And they didn't have super advanced.
Well, that's a boring take, Argent.
No, I mean,
I'm just saying. I think it was. They felt a need to carve out sacred space for themselves.
I think that's the reason why they were built that way. However, I think the whole purpose of them was they were like, we want a big spiritual building, and at the time, the best way to build a big spiritual building was to make a ziggurat or a pyramid or whatever, it's just the most efficient way to build it and have it actually stand there for a while.
And if you look at the geography, and this also goes into, I know John and I were talking about Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steelio. It got a lot wrong, but there is definitely an environmental environment definitely does shape a lot of these things. And so when you take a look at Mesopotamia, they did not have a lot to work with with building materials. Like you go to you go to Persia, you go to Canaan, even parts of Arabia, and especially Greece, and then Egypt. They have stones, they have quarries and stuff. But the thing is, they had to make their own mortar in brick from like bitumen and silt, and that they baked them. And I mean, again, that's also right out of Genesis 11 too, which is
alluvial plain. There's hardly any stone. They weren't in the fortunate position that Egypt was, where there's stone everywhere. They didn't have that advantage. So you got to go get stone from, let's say, the mountains of Arata to the east, and so you have to conquer the people of Arata to force them to give you stone or metal, because there's no metal there either to carve the stone with. So you have to conquer them and import the stone in. So this is one of the reasons why they became imperialistic, was to expand to the north into Turkey and
conquering the conquest of the cedar forests, right?
Yeah,
And
wood too. Yeah, so you have to go to the cedar forests of Lebanon to get all the wood. Yeah, so it was resource poor. So there was a lot of pressure on them to become imperialistic and to form the first universal state under Sargon of Akkad, 2350 BC. So it became very important. But it's interesting regarding the size of these ziggurats. Spengler has this phase where he's talking about when civilizations get to their universal state phase, their Caesarism, and they start conquering huge swathes of territory, that Ramses II in Egypt is like the guy who builds all the biggest Egyptian monuments. He builds the tomb of Ramses II. He builds the Memnon Colossi. These huge. It's a period of gigantism, and in Sumer this seems to correspond to the ruler, the Sumerian ruler named Ur-Nammu. Ur-Nammu went on.
Is he like the social revolutionary guy?
That too, but he went on a major campaign of building giant ziggurats. That he was the guy who initiated the whole concept of the giant ziggurat, and just went on a huge campaign of now we have to have giant ziggurats. So again, it is an ego inflation. It is a demonstration of the might and power of Sumer. You know, here's what we do. We can compete with the Egyptian pyramids, only we'll do it better. The Egyptians did it at the beginning of their life cycle. We're doing it at the end, but we're on top of the world. So there is a phallic, who can build the biggest cock mentality with these pyramids. So they're not 100% religious. There is ego bound up with them. So you guys are correct to pick up on this. There's a lot of ego going on here with these guys.
Yeah. Anyway, so I mean that was a very fun tangent, I'm gonna say. But getting back to, do you know what I think a good thing would be? This could probably be split into 2 episodes. Would you guys be, because Argent had to leave, would you guys be maybe open to going to the Renaissance, getting up to the Renaissance,
Sure.
And then next week maybe, or 2 weeks, whatever works for everybody, doing the modern?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So yeah, let's move on to. Actually, no. I think we need to. Augustine at least needs to be mentioned. I think before we go on to scholasticism in the Middle Ages. Saint Augustine of Hippo, and even a lot of the other, maybe even the Greek Gnostics too. What are your guys' opinions on the Gnostics? Because they have some interesting ideas. Yet at the same time, I think they go a little too far when they talk about like the dirtiness of the body, and it almost seems like it almost gets into some parts where like I don't know how if that sort of, and I almost wonder if that's why it didn't really take off, because it just it's a little negative when it comes to just I guess the idea of the self, because whereas like you have like Nicene Christianity, which the whole concept was your soul, like you are you, it's not just your soul, you are not just your soul, you're not just your body. When you're on this earth, it is like basically everything is one. Whereas the Gnosticism was like you're trapped in that body of yours, and it just seems like it wouldn't create that. Using that as a theological underpinning for a civilization wouldn't necessarily create like the most mentally, I don't know, sane people. I don't know, but
it does.
Either way,
it does have a kind of Eastern Indian pessimism about it, doesn't it? The Gnostic idea that they call it soma sema, the body is a tomb, and it's a tomb for the soul, just as the whole earth is a tomb.
It worked for India. It worked for India, but it just didn't seem like it didn't work for the cultural kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but so the cosmology is that they're basically taking astrology and they're turning it into this idea of a very sinister thing. The archons become identified with these planets that ascend upward. They each have evil influences in them. And as the soul descends from the pleroma, it descends and it takes on the qualities of each of these spheres, but that becomes a prison that you're stuck with down on the worst place in the world, So you've got to get out of it, and the only way to get out of it is through gnosis, knowledge, illumination, which is to realize your divine origins in the world beyond Yahweh.
But in order to do that, though, you need to go get audited with an e-meter.
But it's interesting, though, that they inherit this idea of Yahweh, and they say, Yahweh thinks that he is the highest God. He's not. He is Yaldabaoth. He's a lower God. The higher God is way beyond him, and it's the one. It's basically Plotinus is one, the Indian Brahma. It's the realm of the pleroma that we come from, that is our authentic origin in light, luminosity. And this will get us out of the prison of the body. It will allow us to escape from the determinism of astrology, and we can get out. And
minus the and again, back to the Sufi gentleman I was talking to last night. The idea, like the Sufi sort of view of God, is very, very similar, minus the body being a prison part, which is interesting. This is almost like, and that is like one of the really, like, almost every single major religion has a small esoteric tradition within it, and all of them are very, very similar.
Yeah,
at least in terms of their.
This had an influence, by the way, all the way down to Sting's album called The Soul Cages. That was his interpretation of Gnosticism in popular music, that the body is a cage. We're stuck in these cages. How do we get out of them? Through gnosis. Gnosis is the thing.
Strange Seconds.
I'll admit my knowledge of Gnosticism goes about as far as Crusader Kings 3. So...
yeah, no, but okay. Either way, I think now, since we are on the dualists right now, I think it would be good to briefly bring up history's first anti-Semite, Marcion, also the very first heretic.
Marcion. Oh yeah, okay, I remember that guy. Yeah.
No, basically, like his basically, I think part of it though is he didn't like the sort of the Mesopotamian Semitic culture, and he wanted to take the parts of Christianity that he liked, divorce it from all of the Near Eastern pre-Magian stuff, and paint all that stuff as evil and make it a purely 100% Roman thing.
Didn't he want to get rid of the Old Testament? Yeah.
Basically, his whole thing was that Yahweh was an evil creator god who defied like the great God, and created the world, and that he tricked out. He was actually the snake the whole time in the garden, and that he was. And I think the only difference was that the burning bush was actually the real God, which is kind of weird. But it seemed like he was cherry picking, and it seems like it was he just hated the Jews, probably.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to get rid of the Old Testament. Flush that. It's just the New Testament. That's all we need.
The Old Testament is, like, honestly, I think it's more fun.
I like it. I've read.
I love the
Old Testament several times. I love it. I think it's great.
Book of Judges is heroic literature. It's basically
absolutely
also takes place around the same time as the Trojan War.
One of us mentioned, I forget who. It might have been Strange Seconds who mentioned the Gilgamesh parallel, but actually, the Gilgamesh story appears in the Old Testament in the story of Samson. That's the Gilgamesh story right there, because Samson, the name is based on Shamash, which is the god, sun in Gilgamesh. Shamash is the sun god, and he's the strong man. Samson is the strong man. He pulls down.
I may have gotten that confused. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's the Hebrew echo of the Gilgamesh epic in the Samson.
And then also, like, I feel like there was so much cultural interplay in that area, especially Canaan. That was like back then. That's where all these cultures were basically interacting and created these. Like, basically, you see the Phoenicians and the Philistines and the Canaanites. Culturally speaking, they were like squashed between all these different civilizations, that they took aspects from each of them in a lot of ways. And you also see a lot of similarities between Samson and Heracles. And
Heracles,
also
the Greek echo.
The Middle East has always kind of been a cultural superhighway. I mean, it's like the
at least the Near
Egyptians
East.
have imported culture, the Greeks imported culture, there was native Persian culture, Indians imported culture. Everyone's been there at some point or another and laid stake to something there.
And here's actually, so this is a point where I think we should bring up something that's sort of relevant today. But so this whole meme of cultural appropriation and like, oh no, you can't like I'm sure you guys both know that. Like it's like, oh yeah, no, you can't. Basically, you're going and you're wearing dreadlocks and you're white. You're stealing from their culture. That's disrespectful. Or you're another idea. I'm trying to think of the.
I think we understand the concept.
Or here's another one. You're a white guy and you're the owner of a Mexican restaurant. That's cultural appropriation. It's like, okay, no, it's like, okay, cultural appropriation is like, fight me. Cultural appropriation is a great thing. Cultures have been borrowing and reinterpreting, reimagining,
yes,
sharing things,
right,
taking things, but it's like, no, that is how it works. It's basically, it's basically calling you're basically saying, it's almost like you're saying, saying cultural appropriation is bad is basically, it's like saying taking a shit is bad. Natural process.
Look, this is one of those topics that I just think is very complicated, and I honestly prefer not to talk about it because I've heard the arguments on both sides, and the problem is what I honestly think it comes down to is it's just a very unsatisfying middle answer, which is there's parts of the arguments on both sides that make enough sense that it really depends on the specific situation. Like a white dude with dreads, I honestly think the white.
It doesn't look good. I don't think it looks good.
Yeah, I think
Vikings had dreadlocks. Some Vikings did. So
having that hairstyle is just punishment enough. Honestly, like white dudes look cringy as hell usually because they don't know how to do them in like the ancient Gaelic style where they would have their cultural roots from. They're just like that black guy is able to do it with his hair, but different hair textures and stuff mean that it just never works.
I don't know, but all I'm saying is cultural exchange also stipulates the perpetuation of new cultural things sort of being produced. It's almost like a trade.
From what I've heard, the people who and this is because most people who I've heard who take what they would say is typically the opposite stance to what you guys do, but I'd say the more rational lefty voices, what they'd say is it's not that cultural appropriation is bad. It's just that credit should be given. They wish they're like, in a way, like there's a difference between like, I just came up with this idea. Look, and it's actually based off of someone else.
Plagiarism. At that point, no, that's just plagiarism.
Yeah, no, that's really what it comes down to. And the thing is a lot of it ends up being mixed up in languages, but that honestly is also because you can't have these debates online. Really, these are ones you kind of need to have in person because people don't exactly have the most level heads on most online.
This issue though just seems like pretty straightforward. Like, I mean, even for me, like talking about the cultural appropriation issue, I'm just gonna be straight up. I'm just gonna do the based thing and be like, no, unapologetically. Good. I mean, that's just what happens. I'm not saying it's like good or bad. But take a look at, for instance, if you think about it, there's no such thing as an indigenous culture anywhere. So this is my argument for that. So you're always going to have people from peripheries who come in, displace a people who are there, you always have migrations. You always will have people getting displaced, a new stock of people coming in, building a new empire. They'll be there for 1,000 years. They'll collapse eventually. It's like, is there at that point, if you have so many people like going in and out of these areas over the course of many thousands of years, over and over again, in a bunch of different groups, I mean, how far back do you have to go to prove like what culture is indigenous or not?
I would kind of say the Americas are a bit of an exception to that, though, in the way that most of the peoples in America were migratory tribal peoples, but were typically far more peaceful than the ones that were found in, like, the Central Asian steppe plains that tended to drive each other out. And that's why we have the Ottoman Empire, and that type of stuff.
Yeah, John has something to say.
Here I have to disagree. No, they were not peaceful peoples. If you look at the history of Mesoamerica, it starts with the Olmecs in 1200 BC. And then that's pre-classic, and then it moves to the classic Mayan period, and then it moves to the post-classic, let's say Aztec period. All these tribes are conquering each other. That's all they're doing. The Aztecs come in from the hinterlands as a peripheral people and set up the equivalent of a Roman Empire. They conquer everyone. Then there's also the aspect of the fact that with regard to the Olmec, there's a huge influence from Chinese civilization across the Trans-Pacific on the Olmec. They are in no way, shape, or form unique to America.
How is that? Because I've heard those. I have heard those theories, and again, this could probably be an episode on its own. But no, but I have heard like sort of fringe theories about like, oh yeah, the Chinese treasure fleets going to America in 1421 or whatever. I don't know. It's
later. That's a different thing. But it does highlight the 1421 thing. Does highlight the fact that there is a trans-Pacific diffusion. There's trans-Pacific trade routes. They're well known and they're very.
Could it be the Polynesians, maybe?
I was about to say.
And the Japanese. Well, there are influences of Japanese pottery, Japanese styles on Ecuadorian culture forms, because the currents naturally move from west to east. You can just get in a boat from China and let the currents carry you, and they will carry you right to South America. I mean, it's no problem. It's very.
What was that? There was that one book about
the. If it was the Japanese, though, it would have been pirates.
No. That's what. No. The thing is, that's why you see like those esoteric, basically idols in the Andes that look like Totoro. So.
Yeah, or that if you look at Olmec,
I was making a joke.
Olmec jade figurines look like Chinese guys. Take a look. Pull it up on Google right now. They look like Chinese guys. So there has been an influence from China on Olmec civilization. The dragon and the tiger become the jaguar, and the bird, the eagle, that becomes Quetzalcoatl later on.
One thing though, their cosmologies are virtually non-ident. Like their cosmologies are extremely different. Like if I had to think,
because that has to do with the landscape. Every culture winds up in a different landscape, takes a cosmology that they've inherited from elsewhere, and inflects it differently because it's got to suit that the jungle conditions. It's got to suit that landscape. But you can still see, if you look at it with an artist's eye, let's say an eye of Goethe, you can still see the inheritance from the Chinese in the Olmec civilization. There's no doubt about it. So cultures are not pure entities that just spring out of a landscape. There usually are, in fact, as far as I can tell, always are other cultures that have come in and amalgamated and influenced and hybridized. There's no such thing as a pure culture.
I just want to ask, like, even before the higher civilization, the Neolithic garden cultures and.
That's a confluence. The Neolithic is a confluence of cultures coming in from Turkey, from the north, cultures coming in from the east, from Persia, cultures coming in from the south, from the Persian Gulf, cultures coming in from Egypt. That's Neolithic culture is in no way pure, no way, shape, or form. There's no such thing. This is why racist theories don't work. They just don't, because they don't take into account all of this hybridization that goes on. Sumerian civilization was based on two totally different ethnicities, the Sumerians and the Akkadians. And if you delete the Akkadians, you no longer have Sumerian civilization.
I've always wondered if the Epic of Gilgamesh, if
On that
one of them, if Enki is supposed to represent the Akkadian. Like,
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you're dead on. That's exactly.
And
If
just
I
sort
had
of
to say, to me, it would appear with the time frame of the Olmecs, I could see them having Eastern Asian influence. I think it might be from slightly further south, though. I think actually Polynesian. It would be way before. It would be a form of Proto-Polynesian, essentially. But the Polynesians also didn't come out of nowhere. They had like centuries, if not millennia long traditions of traveling the seas and exploring very specific islands. That's where they dropped off civilizations. It would make sense that they maybe showed up to South America, and that's actually ocean currents do make sense with that. It would bring them down.
Wait, and what was it that Toynbee called the Polynesians? What kind of civilization?
An abortive civilization.
Oh, so like the Vikings. Okay.
Yeah, they're abortive. But don't forget, too, there could be influences further south also from Angkor Wat, which is an Indian civilization that has been exported to Cambodia. And
that's what I was thinking. That actually was what I was thinking, because when I see the Olmec heads, that's what I'm kind of reminded of.
Right. So there could be trans-Pacific influences also from Angkor Wat as well as China. So and American anthropologists are totally paranoid about this because they have this sacred cow that, you can't say that Native American civilizations had influence from these other civilizations because you're detracting from their achievement. It has to be a unique indigenous achievement that just came out of nowhere.
It doesn't mean it still isn't, though. I mean, can it be both?
Oh, yeah, I think it can be both, and it probably is.
I mean, take a look at how much the medieval Christendom took from not just the Greeks and the Romans, but look how much they took from the they didn't really like to admit it. It's the Muslims too.
Yes.
Like Charlemagne designed his capital city after a typical Spanish Arab city.
That's right. Yep. The candy striping on the architecture at Aachen, the Palace of Aachen, mirrors the candy striping on the arches in the south there with places like the Alhambra and so forth. Yeah, absolutely. There has been influence that has come in there. Plus, you have to also consider the fact that during that period with Islam coming into Spain, we received all kinds of stuff, the works of Aristotle, the works of alchemy, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, they were the ones who preserved
Arabic numerals. That all came up.
Almost all of Southern European architecture.
Yes.
Yeah, because we need to basically remember that by the time that the Faustian culture was just getting going, springtime, so early Christendom, so post Charlemagne. By that point, the Magian civilization was well over the hump. It was in its its warring states phase by that point.
Very late, yeah, very late.
And then I'd say its final. I would officially date its collapse. Like if I were to choose a symbolic date, the Battle of the Nile.
Plus, yeah, while the Olmec may be inspired, I could see you could also go and say, well, the Olmec were inspired. The Maya I see as a far more unique interpretation on earlier Olmec things, which you could say is basically wholly Mesoamerican by that point. If you're if you're basing a culture off of a culture that's Mesoamerican, but also based off of another, then it's Mesoamerican.
You nailed it, because at that point with the Maya, they've shed the Chinese pseudomorphosis. It's gone. And they are wholly unique in what they are. So
but the thing that gets me though is, so I wouldn't be as opposed to this possibility of the Chinese being there if the Chinese were themselves a fundamentally seafaring civilization. But they always liked to be isolated in that particular area.
I think more like southern. I think more southern Asian.
I can see
more
that.
like Vietnam or potentially a proto Philippines or because it's hard to actually pinpoint where the Polynesians come from because there's a lot of islands they could have come from. But
I also want to say
on
one
this
thing
issue of the Chinese being a seafaring civilization. The interesting thing about the Chinese is that sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, because
for defense, really,
they have this really conservative attitude, and then sometimes they want to go explore, as the 1421 story with the voyages of Zheng He.
Oh yeah. There's a whole emperor who is just like, I'm gonna build the biggest fleet ever.
We know they came to America with Zheng He, and then when he got back, there was a change of emperor to a more conservative emperor, and that emperor burned all the maps. Burned everything, and he said, we don't do this. We're Chinese. We have everything. We don't need other cultures.
Chinese culture has always been like that. It's always been like, okay, let's erase history. No, the thing is, but basically, the CCP has the mandate of heaven right now. It's the same exact thing.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it's true.
No, I call him. That's why I call him Xi Huangdi.
Which is what?
Xi Huangdi, Xi Jinping, so Xi Huangdi.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, in a way, that does make sense if you're looking at their early philosophers, especially Confucius a lot, really, where with Confucius, it really just mattered by living by the virtues and being a good person by doing that. He never fully put emphasis on, like, yo, you gotta listen to my way of doing it. It was more like
go with the Tao, man.
You live by these rules. I don't care how you arrived at that conclusion. You can arrive at it however the fuck you want, as long as the end result is you're living by the virtues and you're being a good citizen and a good family person. Good, healthy society.
All right.
But either way, so I want to wrap up the next 15 minutes just solely ending on because I think that was a great tangent personally, but I do want to finish just by finishing up the you're talking about the Dark Age intellectuals moving in maybe into some scholasticism,
Sure.
because by this point, what's interesting, the philosophers in clergy and like poets are all one. Like they're pretty much all part of. They're not distinct traditions like they become later on. It's like they're all, because you had for instance, trying to think of a good example, like Gildas and Bede, who were like moral philosophers, but then also sort of like proto-linguists, and then mythologists, like basically were like the first people to start writing down the Arthurian legends back when the Arthurian legend, because the Arthurian legends came in there were like two distinct stages. The first stage was when it was heroic literature, and then it became romantic chivalric literature during the High Middle Ages. But either way, scholasticism. What would you guys say the origins of would you say the origins of scholasticism? It was like always there ever since the fall of the Roman Empire, like as a repository within the church? Or do you think that there was some sort of maybe Islamic influence in a sense? Because Baghdad was a preserved, like you had a lot of people, even Christian priests, who would go to Baghdad to study the works of Aristotle. How did the scholasticist tradition really start going?
There's a reason they call the Dark Ages the Dark Ages, and it's because, well, to put it in a frank and crude way, shit was fucked, yo. So essentially, things weren't.
It's not really why, but okay.
Whenever
it's close enough.
Yeah,
close enough.
It was like I see the Dark Ages as being dark, not necessarily because there was no culture, because there definitely was, and not because we don't know a whole lot about it, because we do, but because it was just a very, very, very shitty time to live.
It
And
was also like extremely politically unstable because
oh yeah, no. Basically, I see as like, so this is kind of an idea I kind of played with. I told you about a year ago. I know, strange seconds, but the idea of a dark age versus a brown age, about how a dark age is a politically is basically when a society, a civilization has fallen and it's in there's a lot of culture kind of being produced, but there is no stability whatsoever in the political sense. Whereas like a brown age would be the exact opposite, culturally sterile. There's no soul whatsoever in the society, but it's very, very stable.
See, that's the thing that about feudalism I always find weird.
And a brownout.
Feudalism is.
Oh no, I've never blacked out. I had to brown out though. That was the night I was.
No, I like that.
Halloween 2016. God, I'm not okay. You know what? I'll tell you guys the story after. I'm not going to tell that story live.
Anyway, though,
Scholasticism, yeah.
What I was thinking though is essentially, what do you do? What does anyone really do when you're in a really shitty situation and that you don't want to be in? You either try and find a way out, or you try and find a way to improve it.
You drink.
And I honestly think a lot of scholasticism was a mix of people just trying to figure out how to make things better than they currently were, and people going, well, things used to be better. Look at all these old stories we have about all these like grand empires and all of that.
But did they actually think that? That's the thing. Or did they think that? So, because there was a lot more material, like the Roman Empire was a lot more materially prosperous than the medieval Christendom. But then you take a look at the Enlightenment. Back in the Enlightenment, by that point, they're like, oh no, everybody before us was barbaric, and we are like the pinnacle of civilization. And you even see that today. Hold on, let me finish. You even see that today too, with people saying, oh yeah, no, they were just a bunch of like racists, idiots yesterday, and we're the enlightened ones. It almost makes you wonder if that's been a constant thing throughout the history of Western civilization, and even in the Middle Ages, you had like Uldric, the peasant from like Wessex or whatever, who was like, we're more advanced than those Aristotelian peoples or something like that.
It's funny that you mention Wessex, because that is actually a very pertinent example in a weird way. At least England in general.
I was referencing not the kingdom. I was thinking Thomas Hardy. But
the Dark Age was also dark because nobody was educated. They knew less. They knew less. Not when I say not nobody, I mean the vast majority of people. And the truth is, they knew even less about the Romans than we do. They knew far less.
Well, that's just because of the literacy, though.
There are cases of Vikings who looked to Roman ruins and they're like, "This is what we want to do one of these days."
Oh yeah, they got in contact with the Eastern Romans for the longest time.
Yeah, that's why some of them eventually literally became like the Vangarian Guard. When they found that, they were like, "Oh shit, Rome is still alive. I'm joining them." Because the thing is, though, is that most people from what I've seen, Rome was kind of viewed with kind of a weird superstition and awe. People didn't really think about the pagan aspect of it. People kind of more thought about Rome as something that evolved from the empire into like the Holy Roman Empire, and like
which is not true.
That it was kind of blurred.
It was part of a mythology they were trying to perpetuate, which is why they called it. It was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire.
We're to be fair though, we're still talking about we're talking about writings that we have that people have interpreted from scholars from thousands of years ago. With you wondering about that peasant, the truth is the peasant probably just thinks, yeah, that's the old aqueduct. It's been here since my dad was here and my dad's dad was here, and that's all they really know. Because
What
the
was
average peasant didn't write shit down either.
This peasant guy's name was Ulrich.
I called him Uldric of Wessex. Yeah.
Ulrich.
I don't know. I just tried to think of the most Anglo-Saxon sounding thing I could.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah. But yeah, what's interesting is how what Toynbee calls these, and not just Toynbee. Oh, I think, does it go back to Vico? It calls these periods heroic ages.
Yeah.
That's right. So not necessarily dark ages, but I mean, yeah, they're violent, but they're also very deeply religious, and the people are generally they seek self-mastery, but I don't know if I forget if it's like they actually believed it was like that, or was it a romanticized view of it? Or...
Yeah, I have my personal interpretation, which you may not like. I personally think, yeah, you could consider the Dark Age a heroic age, but I also think most heroic ages are basically born from those types of environments that are horribly, because feudalism is very stable as like maintaining that system, as in continuing
a very necessary system in the beginning of
however, it is not stable politically at all. People are killing each other. It's going left, right, and center. But weirdly enough, like feudalism is the most stable, unstable political system that has ever existed in a weirdly paradoxical way. But also, feudalism and things and systems akin to it are excellent breeding grounds for narcissism, for people who really want to be self-important and people who actually have the power to potentially be it. And for every one of those great types, well, yeah, you could also go back, and there's plenty of people who go back and nitpick about every historical person and say, oh, they were actually assholes. You don't even need to go that deep. For every one of those like big historical greats, there was probably 200 of like minor nobles who also tried to do the exact same thing and just fucking.
Doesn't Schmeng want to talk about that? About how history is really just the story of a few select individuals and families, and the rest are just the masses are just history's victims. It was like something like that.
I mean, I think ancient history, yeah, because the only people who actually wrote about themselves back then, to that extent, in a way, were narcissistic. Back then, though, what was considered narcissism was a lot less than what would be considered narcissism, especially now, but even like in the 1800s. I mean, if you look at the myth of Narcissus, it was literally a dude who just liked his reflection.
Yeah. And we also need to remember, put this into perspective too. The majority of, if you were to take like all of written history, I know you can't technically do this, but hypothetically, if you were to take every single piece of written history and compile it all together, the majority of that, like over 75% of that, would be post 1400, which is really interesting when you take into account the further back you go, the less and less you know, and the more and more you have to fill in the gaps using things like whether it's a priori assumptions or mythology or things like that, which is fun to do, but like there are certain things we won't ever know, like who the first what the first city actually was. I mean, they say it was Eridu, but that for all we know, that's just the oldest one that's still around. But
the other thing is that you can't even reliably use something like carbon dating to test what the oldest city is, because what if the oldest city was rebuilt?
Yeah.
Your carbon dating doesn't work anymore.
So wait, let's end by let's not actually get into like Aquinas or St. Francis, because I kind of want one of the Catholics here for that one. I feel like it's unfair to do that without them. But no, but maybe how much do you guys know about the sort of poets and the writers of the late first millennium and early second, or yeah, I think in the early second millennium or AD?
Yeah, it's
Like,
yeah. It's interesting that you mention it because these are the writers of the Troubadourian romances that put the Arthurian myths together. And those myths, once again, are a creation of cultural hybridization because the Arthurian romances come out of the Celtic myths.
Celtic, Collection, Olwen, and then, yeah.
Yeah.
And the French come, and then Eisenbach.
Cuchulainn.
Fused together with Christian myths to create the myth of the Grail, the quest for the Grail. But it's not just those guys, it's also the influence of Arabic troubadours.
Really?
From the south. They're coming up from the south, and they infect France with this idea because let's take Tristan and Isolde. Gottfried von Strasberg is the final greatest creator of it. Wagner based his opera on it, but that story has come to us from a fusion on the one hand of the Celtic myth of Dermot and Graina, but on the other hand from the Arabic myth of written by Nizami of Layla and Majnun. And so Layla and Majnun has come up out of North Africa. And in Layla and Majnun, it's the Majnun, this of course inspires the Eric Clapton song Layla, that's where it comes from. But Majnun has so much desire for Layla that it makes him sick and then ill, and he goes downhill and gets worse and worse. And finally,
he's got him on his knee, or she's got him on his knees.
She's gone at the end of the episode, and then he goes mad and just wanders off into the desert and disappears. So it's very haunting. It's a beautiful story. But you can see though that myth has come up from North Africa through Spain into France. Meanwhile, the Celtic myths have come down with Dermot and Graina, and they fuse together to create Tristan and Isolde. So these stories that have come into being with these troubadours, the Arthurian romances, they are all about cultural hybridization and fusion. So that's the thing we should walk away with here, that no culture is pure, that they all come into being out of fusions of other cultures coming together, and there's a native idea there that will organize it, because Tristan and Isolde is all about, in contradistinction to the Celtic and the Arabian influences, it's all about the individual. It's all about Tristan being unique, Isolde being unique, and them loving each other because they're unique. These other traditions don't have that. They're impersonal. They're about eros in general. They're not about amor, love for one individual for another. So, and that becomes the Faustian Western idea of love, of the myth of individuality. It comes out of all this.
Courtly love,
It comes from this cultural fusion, this alembic, this alchemical alembic that went on in Spain and
gestation as Quigley.
Also, just something about the Arthurian myth, something that I find kind of historically comedic in a way. And while it is, I think it's just a coincidence because the actual cultures around romance and love did change during this time, which makes more sense for why the interpretation changed. But also, like when England and France were more chill to each other was around the time Lancelot was added by a French writer. And, he was early on more of like that romantic character where, he and Guinevere, they were in love, but it could not be. And then later when people were like, no, that type of stuff doesn't matter, you should actually stay committed, and that was more popular culturally, Lancelot just became a huge asshole. And that was also around the same time England started hating France.
Interesting. I mean, of course, correlation doesn't equal causation, but it's still fun. That is fun to think about.
Yeah, as I said, it's just a funny coincidence, honestly, because the cultural changes are probably what made what changed the perception or how people told that part of the story. But at the same time, it's also just like, fuck you French, fuck Lancelot.
So I want to end by just mentioning one last dead white male. Who I think is absolutely, it's kind of a funny note to end on, because, and I have his book, Geoffrey of Monmouth. You guys know Geoffrey of Monmouth? He's a writer, history of the kings of Britain, which is this completely made-up, fabricated. Basically, the entire thing is he wrote to justify why England is the true heir to like the Roman.
This is where Arthur first appears in his text. This is the first
But no, because he said
I know
Britain
the
was,
text. I'm terrible with names. I didn't know the.
it was basically like Britain was founded by Brutus, who is like Aeneas's long lost like or half brother.
Sure,
and then it was like something like that, and it's like, and so he also went on his own Aeneas thing, and then he went to the island of Albion, and when he got there, and then he had a son. His son name was like Lund, and then Lund built the first town, London, and then
London.
And then he takes the whole. The funniest part I thought was when he talks about how big Arthur's realm was. Like, if there was a historical Arthur, it was probably some kind of Roman officer, like half like Greg or like Romano-British like officer who somehow managed to get like respect from the tribes or something and rallied them to fight against the Saxons. However, he basically said, okay, Arthur had an empire that imposed not just all of England, but all of but also Scotland, also Ireland, and then also all of Sweden and Norway, and then Denmark, and then Iceland was a colony, and then I think Denmark was just like a client state. But then what happened was there was a civil war in the Roman Empire. So what Arthur had to do, he had to go down and bail the Romans out because he had he was more powerful. He had the biggest army out of all of the kingdoms at the time. And he went and he killed the Roman usurper. And you know what King Arthur did then? King Arthur became the new Roman emperor.
Yeah, right.
It's like King Arthur literally becomes the Roman emperor. In that, it's ridiculous. It's fun to think about.
It tells you though how bad the West wanted to resurrect the Roman Empire and see themselves as the official inheritors of that tradition. And so that leads into the Holy Roman Empire and its creation. Oh, we're resurrecting Rome. Look what we have. We're the inheritors of Rome. In a way, it was essential because it sparked the fire of the West to rekindle it and get it going again. So, it was kind
of a coping mechanism.
We laugh at it, but to them, it was very important, and it got us going again. Those kinds of ideas. We're the Romans. From Charlemagne through Geoffrey of Monmouth, 12th century, and then in the Renaissance, then it shifts to the Greeks. Oh, well, we're the inheritors of the Greeks. Look, Michelangelo will demonstrate how good he can do a comparison with the Greeks. So it shifted from the Romans to the Greeks, but and it was an essential pseudomorphosis that got the West going again. So it's really important, those kinds of ideas.
I mean, it's important to import ideas in order to kind of get the grease, or basically use as grease to get the wheels turning.
Yeah, grease and yeah. Or we wouldn't be here. Again, dead white men. Get rid of them. They're inessential. Who cares? We don't need them. Yeah, actually, we do. Sorry to have to tell you that.
It's and I think it's like that pretty much for every. I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this. Every single tradition. Of course. Okay, that is like I was about to say the most obvious thing ever. So I'm like, honestly, I don't even think I should. I was basically about to say every tradition requires people to. I guess that's how tired I am right now. But no, I didn't get much sleep last night. But
all right, either way, that's a solid 2 hours.
I think it was. Yeah, thank you guys.
So let's do a sequel to this where we pick up from the Middle Ages and go forward.
Yeah, I want to bring another. Oh God, I'm trying to think. I should try to bring Settler's Lament on that time because he's like kind of hard to reach sometimes to get on the streams, but he had to cancel unfortunately.
I do also. I want to talk about absurdism.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah, that's a ways down, but exactly. All right.
Yeah, I just can't wait to talk about the most fun part is going to be when we talk about the 21st century excuses for philosopher. Like I can't even think of an actual deep philosopher these days, at least. I mean, I could think of a couple, but nobody who's
either. To be,
I mean, you get the. I mean, you'll have like the left say Noam Chomsky, you'll have the right say Jordan Peterson, and it's like, okay, they're not like. I mean, they're not. They don't. It's not that they suck, but they're not.
No, they do suck. I disagree here. They do suck. And I'll be happy when we get to that point to outline why in both cases.
Okay.
Yeah, but even then, from someone who is from the left, calling Noam Chomsky a full-on philosopher is a bit of a stretch.
He's a linguist. No, okay, no, the good stuff.
For
he's a good linguist.
Sure, but did he really come up with that many new ideas, or was he just taking the ideas of a bunch? I think honestly, there's not even much creativity to him. He was kind of just like, hey,
no, he's a linguist. That's what he's good at. He's good at. He's a good linguist.
Socialism, but more chill.
In a sentence, it's just negative, 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 negative. So it's all criticism. He has nothing positive to contribute. And ideas come out of positive insights. They're like, oh, I just came up with this incredible idea. Look at this. Chomsky doesn't do that. It's just negative U.S. policy, negative U.S. policy, negative U.S. policy. That's the opposite of a philosopher. That's not how it works. You don't come up with new ideas by being negative about everything. So that's the whole problem with him.
You can't you can't build you can't be anti something. Like that's not a coherent ideology. Like, I think that's why it's like I mean I see all these like books right now for how to be an anti-racist or anti-racism in you. It's like I mean at that point it's even stuff like that. It's like okay, I mean it's very negative. You're basically making a negative ideology if you're making your entire ideology about being anti-something. Why not be pro something? Why not like be pro?
That's I'd say there's a bit more nuance to it than that, but on other notes, I guess I'd kind of say it's kind of a flaw with modern society that prevents a lot of philosophers from having those positive ideas, or at least having them shown as much, because yes, well, a lot of the ideas you need to do that nowadays, and this has been the case basically ever since news really started being televised, is people ask questions now, and those questions you're able to communicate them far more easily. And a lot of it is those people who have those ideas end up spending like 80 to 90% of their time going either no, it's not that, or no, I don't agree with that thing you're saying, or no.
We're gonna get that. We will.
Too many voices.
But there are but before then there are so many other dead white males that we're gonna have to go over. It's not even funny. So I'd love maybe if you guys are able to, I'd be down to continue maybe having this conversation off air.
Sure. Yeah.
But either way, thank you everybody for tuning in to the first episode of the Homo-sapien Agenda. I am so proud I came up with that name. I think that's a funny name. But no, but yeah. So I don't know how the scheduling for this particular one is going to be. I know I try to do a weekly political pig pen, but this one might be a little more arbitrary. But definitely, we're going to try to do this next week. We'll all coordinate, I guess, to see what time best works for us. Ideally, same time next week, but if that doesn't work, we'll find something else. But again, thank you everybody for watching. Again, be sure to like the stream video, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I just hit 500, and that's a small milestone, but an important one, I think. Yeah. And also hit the bell. YouTube tells me the bell does something, and it gives you notifications, but I don't trust YouTube. Either way, though, thank you both of you for coming on. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
was a total blast. I really enjoyed all of it. So I look forward to our next one. This will be great.